Donald Trump can barely finish a sentence anymore, and that might be comforting if he weren't still insisting on trying. If he simply stepped back and stayed quiet, many Americans would probably welcome the silence. But that's not what's happening. Instead, we're watching a former president struggle in real time, slurring words, losing his train of thought, stopping mid-sentence as if the script in his head suddenly disappeared. That's exactly what unfolded during his recent appearance with coal miners at the White House. His second favorite miners, as critics would joke. What should have been a routine event quickly turned into another uncomfortable spectacle. Trump stumbled through remarks, paused awkwardly, and appeared visibly strained. The performance didn't project strength or command. It projected fragility. And the timing couldn't be worse for him. His approval ratings are slipping. Members of his own party are growing quieter or more distant. Economic frustrations are mounting, and voters are feeling it. So Trump did what he always does in moments like this. He pivoted to the economy. He tried to reassure. He tried to boast. He tried to revive familiar talking points. But instead of looking confident, he looked weary. Instead of sounding forceful, he sounded unfocused. There were moments where he seemed to glitch, struggling to push through even simple lines. The optics were difficult to ignore. He opened with one of his favorite refrains, the claim that gas prices are down, repeating it as though repetition alone could make it resonate. Yet the delivery lacked the punch it once had. The pauses were longer. The energy was lower. The message felt less like a rallying cry and more like a recycled script delivered by someone fighting to stay on track. For a politician whose brand has always centered on dominance and strength, these moments matter. Politics is perception. And increasingly, the perception is not of a leader in control, but of a man straining to maintain it. Whether voters see it as decline, fatigue, or simply the pressure of the moment, one thing is clear. The contrast between the image Trump tries to project and what audiences are actually seeing is becoming harder to ignore.
You see what's happening even with gasoline. I was in Iowa last week, and it was $1.85 a gallon. And many of them are $1.99 and $1.91 I saw. We have them under $2 a gallon now. A little while ago, just a year and a half ago, they were at $3.50, $4, $4.50. In California, $7 because of this crazy tax.
Gas in Iowa is hovering around $2.50 to $2.57 a gallon right now. That's the reality. But when Donald Trump talks about it, the numbers tend to shift into something more politically convenient. At this point, it's almost predictable. If we stopped to sound the alarm every single time he exaggerated or flat-out misstated the price of gas, we'd never move on to any other topic. Of course, misinformation should always be challenged, but with Trump, claims about gas and grocery prices have become a routine feature of the script. So the more interesting question isn't whether he's bending the truth. It's why he keeps returning to energy in the first place. Part of it is obvious. He was speaking at an event with coal miners. Energy plays well in that room. It's symbolic. It signals loyalty to fossil fuels and nostalgia for an industrial past he often romanticizes. But there's a second, more strategic reason. Energy is central to the broader economic story he's trying to sell. From the beginning, Trump has pushed a simplified promise: bring energy costs down and everything else will follow. He has repeatedly claimed that if oil and gas prices plummet, inflation will vanish, and everyday goods will suddenly become affordable again. It sounds intuitive on the surface. Energy affects transportation, production, heating. Lower those costs, and prices should fall, right? Except that's not how modern economies actually work. Even if energy prices dropped dramatically, it wouldn't automatically reset the cost of housing, healthcare, food supply chains, insurance, or global manufacturing inputs. Inflation is driven by a complex web of factors: labor markets, supply constraints, global trade dynamics, monetary policy. There isn't a magic lever labeled energy that fixes everything overnight. And even if there were, We're not in a world of negligible energy costs. Markets fluctuate. Production has limits. Global demand doesn't disappear because a politician says it should. What energy does offer Trump, however, is a convenient moving target. It's a promise that can always be deferred. Just give it 2 more weeks. Just wait until production ramps up. Just one more policy change. It becomes an ever-receding solution, always slightly out of reach, always about to solve everything. The contradiction becomes sharper when you look at policy choices. At the same time he talks about making energy abundant and cheap, projects in the clean energy sector are being scaled back or canceled. That potentially reduces long-term supply growth in emerging energy markets. You can't promise limitless energy dominance while shrinking investment pipelines. Less development typically means tighter supply over time, not more. And then there's the rhetorical flourish, the sudden detours into Thomas Edison, American inventors, and nostalgic industrial greatness. It's an attempt to frame energy not just as policy, but as identity, as if invoking the past can substitute for a detailed economic plan. In the end, the heavy focus on energy isn't accidental. It's one of the few economic talking points that feels tangible to voters. People see gas prices posted in giant numbers every day. They feel them immediately. So it becomes a political symbol, a scoreboard. But symbolism isn't the same as strategy. And repeating the promise that lower energy alone will fix a complicated economy doesn't make it any more grounded in economic reality.
Just as clean. As some of you may know today, February 11th is Thomas Edison's birthday. There could be no better way to honor the legacy of the man who lit the world. Did you know that? The man who lit the world, Isaac. Do you know that? You ever hear of Thomas Edison? A little before your time, slightly. Very importantly, 50,000 yesterday. 50,000 we broke on the Dow. And if you remember, when I won, they said if he could ever produce 50,000 by the end of his 4th term, by the end of his 4th year.
Quite frankly, do you even know who that is? Trump asked, stumbling through a reference to Thomas Edison before awkwardly reading from his prepared remarks. He was a great guy, he continued, almost as if he were discovering the line at the same moment as the audience. It says on this script, it says great guy. So he was a great guy. The moment was supposed to sound lighthearted, maybe even charming. Instead, it felt clumsy and forced, like a performer struggling to stay connected to the material. Then came the strange detour into light bulbs, a topic Trump has bizarrely returned to multiple times over the years. He rambled about how much people love the light bulbs before abruptly stopping himself mid-thought, hinting at an inappropriate comparison he claimed would get him in hot water. The crowd laughed politely, but the exchange felt less like deliberate humor and more like confusion disguised as improvisation. Scenes like this continue to fuel criticism that the president often appears unfocused and unprepared, drifting between scripted lines and unscripted tangents that rarely land the way his team likely intends. Behind the scenes, it raises serious questions about strategy. Figures like Stephen Miller and other close advisors reportedly craft speeches designed to keep Trump energized and comfortable, leaning into familiar themes like coal, American industry, and nostalgic manufacturing pride. The idea seems simple. Give him material he enjoys talking about, keep the tone casual, and hope that enthusiasm carries the message. But there's also a clear sense of caution from his inner circle, particularly when it comes to the economy. Economic messaging requires discipline, consistency, and clarity, areas where Trump's off-the-cuff style can quickly create problems. There appears to be growing hesitation about putting him front and center as the primary voice defending economic performance. That hesitation became especially noticeable following reports of internal concerns within the administration, highlighted in political coverage, including pieces from outlets like Vanity Fair. After early signs suggested the administration's messaging was struggling to connect with voters, there was reportedly a push to send Trump out more frequently to promote economic talking points. The strategy seemed straightforward: put the brand Trump himself back in front of the public to reshape the narrative. But the plan didn't last long. Once he began speaking publicly about economic issues, the results reportedly made some advisors uneasy. Even when presenting positive statistics or favorable data, his delivery often drifted into exaggerations, contradictions, or unrelated tangents. Instead of reinforcing confidence, the appearances sometimes created new distractions. Messaging that was meant to reassure voters occasionally ended up feeling chaotic or inconsistent. For a leader whose political identity has long revolved around projecting strength, control, and business expertise, communication missteps carry extra weight. Voters who are worried about their financial stability tend to look for calm, steady explanations. When economic arguments come wrapped in rambling anecdotes or awkward humor, the message can lose credibility, regardless of the numbers being cited. That disconnect appears to be at the center of the administration's communications challenge. It's not always about whether the data exists to support their claims. It's about whether the messenger can deliver those claims in a way that feels confident, coherent, and reassuring. And increasingly, there are signs that even Trump's own team isn't fully convinced he can consistently do that.
In February, you not only usually get the jobs numbers for the previous month, for January, but also February is particularly important because it's in February when you also are supposed to get the updated numbers, the updated jobs numbers from the whole previous calendar year. So in our case, we're waiting for the updated numbers, the refined numbers for all of 2025, plus the official numbers from January. And we're waiting for it. We're now into the second week of February, and the White House still hasn't released that stuff. The only numbers we've got so far for January, those ones I just described, those are from estimates from private companies. I mean, it's sort of the best that we've got. We got to make do with that now until we get the official data. Well, they are finally saying that the official data, the official January data and the refined numbers for all of 2025, they are finally going to be released this Wednesday, February 11th. And who knows what that release will say. We'll see when it comes out. But I will tell you this. It's almost like the White House knows in advance that it's not going to be good news. And the reason I say that is because this was the official press release out of the White House today.
You can see the strain starting to show a little more each time. It wasn't a catastrophic moment, not yet, just a small stumble. A slight unraveling around the edges. But when Donald Trump shifted to talking about the Dow, it revealed something much bigger than a simple verbal slip. It exposed the core philosophy driving this administration's economic messaging. When Trump celebrates the stock market, when he points to the Dow Jones as proof of success, he's not really talking to the average American worker. He's speaking to investors, to shareholders, to the wealthy class whose portfolios rise and fall with those numbers scrolling across CNBC. For most working families, a rising Dow doesn't translate into a dramatic change in daily life. It doesn't suddenly lower rent. It doesn't erase credit card debt. It doesn't make groceries cheaper or healthcare more affordable. Many Americans don't have significant stock holdings beyond modest retirement accounts, if that. A record-breaking trading day might look impressive on paper, but it rarely feels like a huge boost at the kitchen table. But that distinction doesn't seem to matter in Trump's framing of the economy. His focus consistently returns to markets, corporations, and high-net-worth individuals. The language centers on gains at the top, on CEOs, tech executives, hedge fund managers, and billionaires. These are the circles where stock surges truly register as life-changing, and these are also the circles where political influence and personal validation intersect. There's a noticeable pattern. When the market rises, Trump presents it as a personal endorsement. When wealthy executives praise him, he amplifies it. When corporate leaders applaud policy decisions, he frames it as proof of success. The applause of elites appears to carry particular weight. That dynamic was on full display during the event. Trump spent significant time highlighting economic wins framed through the lens of business and industry titans. He invoked historical industrial icons like Thomas Edison, blending nostalgia with modern wealth-building rhetoric. And yes, he even received a trophy during the appearance, a symbolic gesture that clearly delighted him. For Trump, recognition isn't incidental. It's fuel. From his perspective, it likely felt like a strong day, praise for the markets, praise for industry, a ceremonial award, applause from a friendly crowd, validation layered on validation. But then came the moment that undercut it. He kept talking. He drifted off script. And the delivery began to falter. Words tangled. Thoughts stalled. The rhythm broke down. What was meant to be a triumphant messaging event shifted into something uncomfortable, a visible struggle to regain control of the narrative and the sentence at the same time. It's a revealing contrast. On one hand, an administration eager to spotlight gains in the upper tiers of the economy. On the other, a messenger who increasingly appears strained while delivering that message. The larger tension is this. If your economic success story primarily resonates with those already thriving, it becomes harder to convince everyone else they're part of the victory. And when the delivery itself starts to wobble, the gap between message and reality feels even wider. In the end, it wasn't just about a verbal glitch. It was about priorities, who the celebration is really for, and who's left watching it from the sidelines. At one point, he was barely intelligible. Words blurred together. Sentences trailed off. He couldn't sustain a coherent stretch for more than a few minutes at a time. And when the event wrapped up, after the trophy presentation, after the scripted references to historical figures he appeared to know only a single pre-written fact about, he simply walked away. No questions. Not about Epstein. Not about the airspace shutdown. Not about the economy. Nothing. He exited the stage without taking a single press question, and that decision speaks volumes. Because whether you agree with him or not, presidents who feel politically secure typically face the press. They project command. They defend their policies. They engage. When someone avoids that entirely, it raises an obvious question: why? Critics argue the answer is weakness. And that perception of weakness may now extend beyond optics. It may be seeping into Congress. One of the most significant political blows to Trump's agenda happened quietly in the House of Representatives around midnight. 3 Republicans broke ranks with their party leadership and with Speaker Mike Johnson to allow a procedural vote that could bring measures to the floor aimed at striking down Trump's tariffs. That might sound technical. It isn't. Because tariffs are central to Trump's identity. They are arguably his favorite policy tool, the instrument he uses most aggressively and most personally. Not necessarily as a carefully calibrated economic strategy, but as leverage, as punishment, as a pressure tactic. Tariffs in Trump's political world are power. When he feels slighted by a foreign leader, tariffs appear. When he wants leverage in negotiations, tariffs appear. When he wants to demonstrate dominance, tariffs appear. They are less a scalpel and more a hammer. And that's why this House vote matters so much. The vote itself wasn't directly about tariffs, it was procedural. It was about whether leadership could block debate and prevent these measures from reaching the floor. Until now, Mike Johnson had the ability to keep those votes bottled up. But when Thomas Massie, Kevin Kiley, likely the Kevin Y referenced, and Don Bacon broke ranks, they effectively said, "Let's vote." That changes everything. Because now Republicans face a political trap with no easy exit. Option 1, vote against Trump's tariffs. If they do that, they publicly rebuke what has been one of his signature economic policies. That makes Trump look politically vulnerable. It signals cracks in party unity. It undercuts the image of total control he tries to project. Option 2, vote in favor of the tariffs. If they do that, they own the economic consequences. And those consequences are not abstract. Critics argue tariffs function like taxes on consumers. They raise costs for importers, which often get passed down to businesses and households. Opponents cite estimates suggesting American families could face thousands of dollars in additional annual costs tied to trade restrictions. Manufacturing disruptions, supply chain shifts, retaliatory tariffs, all of it becomes campaign material. Imagine the ads. You voted for higher costs. You backed the policy that drove jobs away. You supported the tariffs that raised prices on families. For Republicans in competitive districts, that's dangerous terrain. So this becomes more than just a trade debate. It becomes a referendum on Trump's grip over his party. If members defect, it signals erosion of his authority. If they fall in line, they risk tying themselves to policies that may be unpopular at home. Either way, it's not the posture of dominance Trump prefers. And that's why this moment feels larger than one speech glitch or one awkward event exit. It reflects a broader pattern: rhetorical struggles on stage, increasing avoidance of unscripted press, fractures inside Congress, and mounting scrutiny over economic policy that critics describe as erratic rather than strategic. Supporters will argue that tariffs are necessary leverage and that internal party debates are normal. Opponents will argue the policy has been reactive, personal, and economically disruptive. But politically speaking, what matters most is perception. And right now, the perception among many observers is this: Trump's central policy tool is under challenge from within his own party. His messaging is growing less disciplined. His public performances are drawing more scrutiny. And the economic argument he relies on is facing increasing pushback. That combination doesn't suggest momentum. It suggests pressure. And whether that pressure leads to policy change, deeper party fractures, or intensified political conflict remains to be seen. But what's clear is that the aura of invulnerability, the image of total command, is facing visible tests. For a leader whose brand has always been strength, that may be the most consequential development of all. Last interview. He looks weaker. Politically weaker. The polling reflects it. The economic numbers aren't giving him much cover. And when he steps up to speak, instead of projecting strength, he often struggles to get through his own message. That's the reality he's facing right now. There's no clear economic win to point to. No unifying message that's breaking through. And when communication itself becomes a challenge, it only magnifies the broader political vulnerability. Leadership depends heavily on perception, on clarity, confidence, and command. When those begin to slip, people notice. That's why it's important to keep paying attention, not just to the headlines, but to the patterns, the polling trends, the fractures within his own party, the policy fights unfolding in Congress, the way economic messaging shifts from bold promises to defensive explanations. All of it paints a bigger picture. Political strength isn't just about holding office. It's about maintaining influence, discipline, and the ability to control the narrative. And right now, that control appears to be weakening. So stay engaged. Stay informed. Watch how these battles unfold. In the House, in the economy, and in public opinion. Because the direction of the country isn't shaped by speeches alone. It's shaped by whether people are paying attention when those speeches start to falter. And we are at one of those moments.